Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the University of Hong Kong Faculty of Law. My name is Fu Hualing. I'm the Associate Dean of the Faculty of Law for China Affairs. Today we are honored to have Mr. Michel Forst, the UN Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders, to talk to us on a very exciting topic, a very topical issue that is promoting human rights in a changing world, threats, challenges, and opportunities. The Pooja asked me to say a few words before I hand the floor to Mr. Forst. Something about human rights defenders in China. So I thought I would spend a few minutes on that while we are waiting for other people to come in. For people who know me, I have a research interest on human rights defenders in China. For some reason, which I don't really remember now, I started to interview lawyers in China about 11 years ago. Back then, they were not called human rights lawyers, they were called the Wei-Chuan lawyers. I remember in 2006, 2007, I went to Beijing. By the way, in those days, they were all in Beijing. You don't find a single human rights lawyers outside of the capital. So I remember I went to Peking University, and the first person I met was Deng Biao. And then I met his co-director, Xu Ziyong. Then I met still quite young lawyer Pu Ziqiang. And then I met Li Fangping, Li Heping. A year later, I met some lawyers who are much younger. Jiang Tianyong, who is in detention center. And then I met with Wang Quanzhang, who is now breaking Guinness record for the youngest lawyer detained in the Chinese system. Looking back, more than 10 years after, when I was interviewing those lawyers, they were lawyers, they were on the side of government. Some of the lawyers were, let's say, the best 10 lawyers of the year. They were in the news all the time. In the official press, the government was saying, look at those lawyers who are using law to protect rights of citizens. I was looking at the name again. Deng Biao now, Deng Biao used to be a law professor. He was forced into exile. He's in New York, who is the first person I interviewed. The second person I interviewed was Xu Ziyong, who is a 7 and 4 year sentence. And then Pu Ziqiang, of course, he was sentenced and released. Li Heping, of course, we know what happened to him. The only person who is not really in trouble or was looking at the list is Li Fangping. Somehow he managed to stay out and continue to be a human rights lawyer. So we're talking about the lawyers, the dozens of lawyers whom I interviewed 10 years ago. The vast majority were in big trouble with the system. So I think in a ways they have exhausted the institutional measures. They have gone through all the legal mechanism, they have used all the procedures, legal institutions they could use to, for their protection. It seems there's not that much they can do within the boundary of Chinese law, within the boundary of Chinese institution. So I guess the only way, the only alternative for them is to seek assistance from the UN mechanism. So in that sense, they need your help. We need your help. So on that sad note, I hand the floor to Ms. Forst to talk about human rights defenders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I would like to start by thanking the University of Hong Kong for this invitation. And as you know, I've understood that I'm today concluding a series of discussions in the region. I was recently in Thailand. I was also yesterday in Cambodia for a couple of days to give a lecture, and now that's my last day in Asia. I'm traveling back to France tonight with a set of information received from the series of meetings that I got with civil society organizations, defenders, but also in some countries that I visited with the state. And this is extremely useful for special rapporteurs not to only stay in their offices in Geneva or elsewhere, but also to travel in the regions to meet with the people they are taking care of. It gives a better sense and a better understanding of the situation of the people that are in charge to protect them. You may have understood that this will not be a lecture on the situation of human rights defenders in China or in Hong Kong, and I didn't do a similar conference when I was in Cambodia or in Thailand. The agreement was more to present my mandate as a mandate to protect defenders, and then also to look with you on how I see the global trends on human rights defenders or for human rights defenders in the region, and what are the main risks that they are facing in the region, but also compared to the rest of the world. And I must say I'd like to travel to Asia, and I hope to be further invited to a number of countries here in the region to further have the possibility to engage with more and more stakeholders. I've been traveling to the Philippines a couple of months ago. I was also in Mongolia, extremely interesting meeting in which I also met not only with the defenders but also with national institutions. And for me, for my mandate, you will see that a strong national commission, a strong national institution is a key element for the protection of defenders. I was also invited in Sri Lanka by Forum Asia to participate in a meeting where I met with a large number of defenders coming from the region to exchange with me, and that was extremely informative for me to listen to the voices coming from the region. As you know, you may have read or have tried to Google on the net. This mandate has been established like 20 years ago after a long discussion that took place at the UN because states thought that it might be time at the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights to look at how we could do better to protect human rights defenders. And after a long debate, a long fight, long discussions in which many states were involved, but also many organizations, many civil society organizations, the UN decided to adopt what they call the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. And we'll come back later on the definition of what are defenders, because this is something that currently it's very much debated by many states that would like to defeat this broad definition on human rights defenders. But after the UN decided to adopt this landmark resolution on defenders, states thought that it was not enough. That as a declaration, it's not enough to protect defenders, and they decided to establish a concrete mandate, that is to ask someone to take care of the situation of defenders. And in 2000, Hina Jilani from Pakistan was appointed as a special representative of the UN Secretary General on the protection of human rights defenders. And since 2000, there has been another mandate holder from Africa, and myself have been appointed in June 2014 by the Human Rights Council in Geneva for a 3-year mandate to look at the situation of defenders, but also to find ways to better protect defenders. And recently, in March this year, my mandate has been extended for another 3 years term to continue the work that I'm doing and to find ways to offer to the international communities some reflections on how to protect defenders. I must say that, because it might be clear to you that I'm not a staff of the UN. I've not been appointed to be a staff of the UN. I'm what they call a UN independent expert. I've received a mandate from the UN to do investigations into countries, to send communications to protect the defenders, but I'm not a staff of the UN, which is for us, for my colleagues and myself, a great change because we have the possibility to say what we want to anyone. So we are free to say, to tell the truth to states, but also in some occasions also to tell to the UN that they could do better. And I must say that in many occasions, I'm free to say that the UN could do better to protect defenders, especially those in the region who are facing reprisals. So I'm free to say anything, to talk to states. I'm speaking to states. I'm speaking to also what we call non-state actors. We'll come later on what are state actors. Speak also to UN agencies, and also to anyone. And I'm also pleased to say that I'm also invited by many universities to present my mandate, but also to present means by which defenders that are at risk in many countries could better be protected. The key objectives of this mandate are very broad, but in fact very difficult to implement. The broad objective is to do better and to protect defenders. And you see that with this broad definition and the lack of means, the lack of resources, it's difficult to in fact protect many defenders in the world. What I'm asked also to do is to document the situation of defenders in countries, that is to travel in countries at the invitation of countries, at the invitation of governments, and to then present recommendations to states, but also to other stakeholders on how to protect defenders and also to mitigate or to alleviate the risks that they are facing. To also follow individual cases, and I must say that currently I do receive an increasing number of situations and cases from all parts of the world, from Asia, of course, from different countries in Asia, on the situation of defenders. Many people that are at risk are hoping that my mandate and also other mandates could find ways to protect them, to alleviate the risks that they are facing in so many countries. And lastly, part of my work is to do better in providing information to all stakeholders on what are the defenders and how this landmark resolution, the Declaration on Human Rights Defenders, could be better implemented. And in terms of my resources, my means, what I'm doing, as I said, is to travel to countries. The problem is that to make an official visit to a country, you need to be invited by state. So I'm looking at what are the cases that we receive in many countries, and I'm sending a letter to those governments asking to be invited. Some governments reply and invite me formally to do an investigation. I spent 10 days, 2 weeks in the country, travel in different parts of the country, not saying the capital, meeting with different stakeholders. And then this is for me the occasion also to present a full report that is then discussed and presented at the UN, by which also civil society organizations have the possibility to give a say and to present their own views. And it's a huge event at the UN when you present a report on a country. But of course, many countries don't want to invite me. They don't want to invite me because they know that there will be a report. And in many countries, and especially in those countries in which defenders are facing threats and risk, don't want to invite me because they don't want to see a report. They don't want to discuss, in fact, the situation, and don't want to see the situation of the country being discussed at the UN, and they don't want to receive, in fact, recommendations on how to protect defenders. That's why when I'm not invited, I invite myself to those countries, and for that I look at the possibility to have such institutions as universities to invite me. Sometimes it's networks of defenders that invite me, and sometimes also embassies also would like to invite me, especially in countries in which it's difficult for me to enter. And having the possibility to be also invited, not by the state but by others, that offers me the possibility also to meet with many defenders. And I use the time I spent in the country to have separate meetings to discuss with defenders, to get a sense of what is the situation, and sometimes, and at many occasions, they give me indications on how to better understand the situation and to send communications. Of course, as I said, I do receive communications from defenders from many countries, from many defenders that are seeking protection from the UN, and for that, the UN Special Rapporteurs have the possibility to send communications to states. Communications is a letter addressed to a state by which you raise an issue, you ask questions, you send a series of allegations to states, asking questions, and states have 60 days to reply to the letters. And for the time when we send the letters to states and the time when they prepare the replies, there is full confidentiality. That is, the people don't know that I've been sending a letter, and we engage with the state for a series of discussions on the situation. And after a couple of weeks, after the 60 days, my letter and the response of the state becomes public. And if you are interested to see the level of communications from my mandate to different countries in the region, you have a full access to my website in which you can click on the chapter dedicated to Asia, then on the chapter dedicated to a given country, and then you click on my letters, and then you have a response from the state. And I must say that the response from the states is a very good indication on the level of cooperation between the UN and special rapporteurs. But it's also a tool for defenders to take action. That is, they could also take the response from the state on their own situation or on their own case, and then to further try to engage with the state to do better for their protection. When I'm traveling to countries being invited, that's also, as I said, the possibility to present a report. Unfortunately, we special rapporteurs, we don't have a lot of resources at the UN, and we can do only 2 official missions a year. That is 2 official missions a year, and then 2 possibilities to present a report. Then we have to choose the countries in which we travel officially. And that's something sometimes complicated, because you receive sometimes more requests to visit then you have the possibility to visit countries, and you have to also be strategic in the way we decide where to travel, in which country you travel. And that's why we try to balance between academic visits and official visits to make sure that you would cover a global set of countries, a global set of situations in many countries. I was very pleased, Professor, to see that you started the presentation by naming names. And that's for me extremely important also to name names. And when I start those presentations of my mandate to students or to different stakeholders, I also like to name names, and especially one name, Berta Cáceres, who was murdered on the 6th of March 2016. It was precisely the day when I presented my report to the UN. Was it a coincidence? I don't know. But at least it's important for me to recall the name of Berta Cáceres, and I would like to pay tribute to her, but also to all those people who have been killed and murdered since this mandate has been established. She was a brave woman. She was sort of iconic person representing human rights defenders. She was fighting for gender issues. She was also protecting the rights of those who are trying to promote gender identity and sexual orientation. But she was also an activist, a leader of social movements, someone who was involved in the protection of land and environment. And we don't know really why she has been murdered, but she was an activist, and for states would have many reasons to kill her. Also, as you did, I would like to pay tribute to all those defenders that in the world have been killed or have been arrested and are currently facing so many risks. And maybe you don't know that, but there is an initiative that has been taken by a group of NGOs, supported by states and myself, that is to establish a memorial for the victims. That is to remember the names of all those who have been killed, murdered, passed away for the promotion of human rights and civil liberties. And an estimate that has been made by a group of NGOs would say that since 20 years, since the United Nations and states have agreed to protect defenders, more than 4,000 have been killed. And for me, that's probably only the tip of the iceberg, and probably there are more and more defenders that have been killed since this landmark resolution has been adopted. There's a question that is very frequently asked by states, but also by many actors, is who are in fact humanist defenders? And there is an agreement at the UN to agree that what has been agreed 20 years ago in this UN Declaration on Humanist Defense would be the definition of humanist defenders. Now, that is every person, every organization that simply tries to protect the rights or to promote the rights would be considered as a defender if they are operating in a pacific manner, that is non-violent. And you see that having in mind this very broad definition would mean that everyone could be or could become a defender. You don't need to belong to an organization. You don't need to be full-time a defender, but it could be a professor, a medical doctor, a teacher, a lawyer, someone who is working with an organization, a community leader, indigenous people who are opposing a mega project that would destroy their land or to affect their land or would pollute the water that they were trying to drink. A student, a prison guard, sometimes are becoming defenders, and of course journalists, whistleblowers, and all those who are investigating on cases of corruption or misconduct by public officials. Could be also families of victims, and we see in many countries families of disappeared people becoming humanist defenders. That is, families that are seeking simply like wanted to find a solution and where are the relatives that have been disappeared. And in many countries, including in Asia, you see an increasing number of people who have been disappeared by state officials, or we don't know by whom, but at least people who have been disappeared and their families becoming defenders. And of course, as you said, many lawyers, in fact, around the world are in fact humanist defenders trying to protect citizens against the state, against the abuses, and against those who are trying to harass people who are defending and protecting human rights. And many defenders, in fact, don't know that they are defenders. And I was struck by, when meeting with defenders, traveling to countries, to see that when I'm meeting with people, they don't know that they are defenders. And it's only after discussion with me, after discussion with others, that they do realize that they are in fact defenders because they are protecting the rights and promoting the rights. And those people are in fact becoming more and more, and we see an increasing number of people that are becoming humanist defenders or that do realize that they are defenders. As I said, you don't need to be full-time to be a defender, and you have sometimes people that are simply facing a situation, trying to protect others, and then become a defender. In my country, in Europe, in many countries, you see the people who are simply trying to protect the rights of migrants, for instance, trying to help migrants becoming independent by simply helping them to find food, clothes, to reload the telephone mobile telephone, and becoming defenders for such. And my duty is to recall that in such occasions, it is the primary duty of the state to protect those people and to make sure that those people could operate in what we call a safe and enabling environment, which is not the case in many countries around the world. When I started with this mandate, I decided that rather than to stay in my office and to draft communications and to write reports, it would be useful to also travel to the regions and to listen to the voice of defenders. And this is why I decided to, in 2014, to organize a series of consultations with defenders in which I met with many defenders. I organized 7 consultations, as I said, to try and to analyze what will be the global trends in the world on the situation of human rights defenders. And I must say that they all came to the same conclusion, that is that you are facing in the world, and that's also applied for Asia, a shrinking space for civil society organizations. That is, the space is more and more shrinking by many actors on the civil society organizations, but also on those who are trying to protect rights and to publicize situations in many countries. Political instability in many countries is also an element that will contribute to the shrinking of civil space for civil society organizations. But also you have in many more countries the political discourse by political actors that would target defenders and present them as enemies of the state, as enemies of the countries, as terrorists or linked to terrorism, or linked to Western organizations promoting Western values to the states, or simply as people who are opposing the development of their countries. And the fact that those attacks are coming from public officials and that are relayed or publicized by many media is a form of also contributing to the shrinking space of society in many countries. You see in many more countries diversification of the different forms of attacks. Criminalization of defenders is the main batteries by which they are currently at risk. Online attacks, judicial harassments of defenders, arbitrary arrest of defenders, of course, many cases of torture, and as I said, people who are simply abducted, that would disappear, and you don't hear anything more of them. And you have many cases of those people, including in the region. What is, for me, extremely worrying is that in more and more countries, you see the use and misuse of the law to target human rights defenders and to target those who are promoting liberty and freedoms. You are, in many countries, government and parliament that are passing law to make it more difficult for organizations to register or to re-register, asking them to re-register or to increase the burden of registration for organizations is also a way for states to shrink the space of organizations. Access to funding is also something that you see in more and more countries. And you see a trend by which states would copy bad laws passed by other countries, and they see that those laws are effective in harassing, threatening defenders, and they copy the bad law and try to implement those laws in their own countries. And in the case of access to funding, that is something that is, for me, a trend which is more and more worrying in the world, including in Asia, I must say. That is, it makes it more difficult for organizations to receive funding coming from abroad. And the problem is not the level of funding, because funding exists. You have many foundations, governments that would like to provide access to funding to organizations, but more and more restrictions to access to funding make it more and more difficult for those organizations to operate. And sometimes you see in many countries, organizations are simply starving getting rid of the staff because they don't have the possibility to receive funding. And if they receive funding, they have to declare, or they are declared themselves as foreign agents. And you see how it could vilify defenders when they are called the agents of foreign forces promoting foreign values. What is also worrying in the region, after having spoken with many defenders, is that you have not only the states that are targeting the defenders, but of course the state using the means of the state, using the means of the police, the army, the marine in many states, the justice system of their own countries, and the ruling party. The ruling party in many countries is also a threat for many defenders. But also you have what we call non-state actors that would target defenders. And amongst non-state actors, you have the media. In many countries, you have media that are under the control of the ruling party or under the control of governments, and that would then relay information and vilification from the authorities against the defenders. Another threat for defenders in many countries are companies. More and more defenders tell and send communications on the fact that they are in fact targeted by international companies that would operate in their countries. They would be targeted not only by the companies, but also by the contractors of the companies, by security guards of the companies. And you do receive more and more information, communications, giving names of companies that operate abroad, including companies, international companies, that would then target defenders. And in some cases, you have also religious groups that would target defenders, especially those who are working on difficult issues like sexual and reproductive rights, or those who are simply trying to protect the rights of LGBTI defenders. And religions play, in some countries, a very complicated role by targeting defenders. What defenders say in many countries is that you have not only the global category of defenders that are at risk, but some particular categories that would face some risk. That's the case, for instance, with women human rights defenders. And there is a world coalition of women human rights defenders and local organizations also working on gender issues that would say that women human rights defenders are facing a multiplicity of risks, not only because they are defenders, but also because they are women. And in such case, you have to also look at the possibility to find special ways and special means to protect women human rights defenders that are currently at risk. As I said, those who are at risk are also those who are working on land and environment, defenders of LGBTIs, journalists, but also lawyers, bloggers, whistleblowers, people who are trying to denounce corruption and misconduct. What is striking is now to see that not only the defenders themselves are targeted by states and by non-state actors, but also the families. When you are not able to target the people, then you target the families. And in many countries, you see defenders that are being protected, relocated elsewhere to be protected. And I must say that many countries do relocate defenders as well when they are at risk. And when defenders are not anymore in the countries, then the families that are targeted, the children, the spouses are targeted. In terms of regional specificities, I would say that, if, for instance, in the MENA regions, Middle East, you have an increasing number of attacks led by Islamic extremist groups. And the fact that in those countries, those groups are more and more powerful would be a threat for defenders in that region. In Latin America, but also in other countries, in other regions, the fact that you see an increasing number of cases in which the militaries are coming to power is also a threat for many defenders. You have also an increasing number of cases and situations in which you have social movements try to protest against the price increase or against the ruling party, against the government are trying to then becoming at risk in those countries. In Latin America, those who are trying to protect indigenous peoples also those defenders would be currently the most at risk. In Asia, and that's the case also for Europe, you see that the fact that you have facing situations in which the governments are harassing defenders are also a risk for defenders. In Western Europe, you will see an increasing number of attacks against migrants, as I said. People who are trying to protect the rights of migrants are currently more and more targeted. You would see also an increasing number of threats against whistleblowers. And the concept of whistleblowers is not well known in many countries. And in many countries, this concept is not at all recognized, and then defenders are not protected. You are also in Europe, but also in many parts of the world, the impact of the economic crisis that would be also be a risk and a threat for defenders, and an increasing number of forms of discriminations against minorities. In Africa and sub-Saharan Africa, you have also conflict situations and post-conflict situations, ethnic tensions by which defenders would be at risk. And trying to look at the possibility to hold separate consultations with different categories of defenders that are at risk to see what would be the best solution to protect the rights and the situation. As I said, in the region, I don't want to come back to the situation in the region in detail, but I would say that having met with defenders in the region, they are facing globally the same threats and the same risk as in many parts of the world. I would say that also here you would see an increasing number of cases of criminalization of defenders by state officials, the vilification of the work done by defenders by state officials that would try to diminish the impact and the work done by defenders. As I said, restriction to access to funding, that is something that we are facing also in the region. And I must say that I'm really worried by the fact that defenders in the region don't have any more access to funding, and the increased number of administrative barriers to the operation of those defenders. You also political parties, the opposition political parties that are seen as actors and that are currently targeted by the governments. You have also in the region, as I said, an increasing number of arbitrary arrests. And I don't want to name names here in the country, but you have an increased number of arbitrary arrests, and I've received a number of cases of people that have been arrested in prison without having been charged, and that don't have an access to lawyers, don't receive medical care, and sometimes are facing unfair trials. As I said, companies are becoming more and more enemies of defenders, and contractors of companies in the region are also, in many occasions, directly implicated in aggressions and attacks against human rights defenders that would oppose a development project. As I said, I don't want to come back on the role of media, but in the region, we do see that the media play a very tricky role by targeting defenders and sometimes relaying campaigns on the role that they are playing. What is worrying for me is also the fact that in many countries you don't have a national commission, a national institution that will be, for me, a tool for the protection of defenders. One of my predecessors published a report in which she tried to analyze the key elements that would be enabling civil society organizations to operate, and she had identified that strong independent national institutions would be a key element for the protection of defenders. And currently in the region, I see strong attacks against those national institutions. That's the case in Australia. I remember the In Australia, the chair of the National Commission was strongly attacked by the Attorney General. That's the case also in Afghanistan, where members and staff of the National Commission have been killed. That's the case also in the Maldives, in which defenders and the National Commission has been currently attacked by public officials. What is striking, and we'll conclude by this, is to say that those different forms of attacks have also implications on the welfare of defenders. They are facing more and more burnout, stress, diseases that are directly linked to the atmosphere of threats and attacks against those defenders. I've been trying to be more effective in the region by trying to have more visits in the country. My predecessors have already undertaken official visits in the region. I've been to India, to Indonesia, to Thailand, for instance. And if you are interested, you could read the reports of my predecessors. They are available online on my website. We have, as I said, and I have personally sent an increasing number of communications to many countries in the region, drawing the attention of the state on the difficult situations, not only on situations of defenders that are facing risk, have been arrested, have disappeared, but also on trends and global trends in different countries of the regions. And we also try to, together with my colleagues, to send more and more communications when we see laws that are discussed by Parliament that could have an impact on the situation of defenders. As I said, if you are interested to read my communications, please look at my website, and you'd click the possibility to click on my letters and then the response of the states. Of course, everything is not negative. You have also positive lights that I try to highlight in my report. One of my last report was precisely to highlight good practice, and you see, if you are interested, you can read this report to highlight good practice provided by states, and some states are really effective in the protection of defenders by trying to promote concrete actions for the protection of defenders. And you see that many more actors are currently instrumental for the protection of defenders. I must say that you have more and more strong civil society organizations, while at the same time they are facing more and more threats, but civil society organizations and networks of defenders are more and more organized, and that's for me a positive signal that things are always improving. National solidarity between defenders is something new, and you see more and more acts of solidarity between regions, between countries, between networks, between international networks to protect defenders when they are at risk. And you see that strong mobilization of networks can be in some occasions very useful to protect defenders. Some countries also, including in the region, have decided to put the concept of defenders in the law. That's the case for Mongolia, that is currently discussing a draft law on the protection of defenders, and I'm one of those who are trying to promote the idea to put the concept of defenders in law would be a way to also protect defenders. As I said, many initiatives have been taken to also to relocate defenders, and the EU, but also other countries and organizations can also protect defenders by relocating them when they are at risk, and that's something that we see more and more happening. There is also an initiative, a positive initiative that has been taken by a group of states that is to establish what we call shelter cities. That is a place by which defenders are at risk could be relocated, and sometimes with the families to have at least for a couple of months and sometimes a year the possibility to receive medical care, psychological support, and also training, and then they could go back to the country to continue, as I said, to continue the fight. The guidelines developed by embassies are also useful tools to guide the role of ambassadors and embassies on the protection of defenders. And I'm pleased to say that more and more embassies, more and more countries develop guidelines on how they could inform and guide their embassies when embassies are facing defenders are seeking protection from those states. Interesting to see that one country, Canada has decided to pass not only guidelines for the protection of defenders, but also guidelines on how their companies operating abroad should behave when defenders are currently at risk. I'm always concluding but by calling for more solidarity for defenders. You could also here in Hong Kong, but also in China, promote this UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders. It has been translated in many languages, local languages as well. And next year, as I said, we will celebrate the 20th anniversary, and it could be also for the university, but also for other actors, a way to publicize the UN Declaration, also the concept of defenders. You also have the possibility to publicize the reports of my mandate, but also of my colleagues that could also inform on the situation of defenders. And if you see that it could be useful when you are facing situations, as you said, when you are facing complicated defense for lawyers, for instance, you could also send to my mandate cases, situations, and then ask me to take action on cases, if needs be, to protect lawyers and defenders that are at risk. And lastly, what will be also useful is to relay and to promote the information of the group of civil society organizations. And lastly, I would say, as I said, anyone can become a defender, and you could also become a defender yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this global survey of challenges and, more importantly, opportunities that are available for human rights defenders. So I have some time for questions. Could I just ask you to first identify yourself and try to be very concise about your questions? Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Melissa. I'm from the Philippines. I have more of a comment than a question. My comment would seem critical of the OHCHR, but I hope that you would take it in the context of the debate on the role of an international organization in global governance and the problem of democratic deficit. My comment is that the OHCHR seems to be focusing on specific incidents of extrajudicial killings in the Philippines, but makes no attempt at a review of the cause of the institutional breakdown that is engendering the killings and the particular role of the OHCHR in this institutional breakdown. I refer to the institutional breakdown characterized by the executive capture of the judicial and legislative departments, as exemplified by the vote buying that attended the impeachment of the Chief Justice Corona. I refer to the role of the OHCHR in this institutional breakdown, in particular when it said in its Universal Periodic Report that the impeachment was hallmark of rule of law in the Philippines, without prior investigation and research into the vote buying and arm twisting that attended the impeachment. In effect, OHCHR interfered in local elite politics and legitimized the executive capture of the legislative and judicial departments, and in the long run, the immobilization of our institutions to address executive abuses, including extrajudicial killings. Now, the Supreme Court is unable to mobilize lawyers and law students to defend survivors of the drug war, when in fact in the past, the Supreme Court was able to launch a judicial summit on extrajudicial killings and cause a drop in the statistics on extrajudicial killings. In the past, the public received Alston with glee when he tried to investigate extrajudicial killings. When a UN rapporteur tried to enter the country, the public looked at the rapporteur as a proxy warrior in favor of the old elite against the new elite. Unless the OHCHR launches an investigation into institutional breakdown and its role in it, there will be no end to the slaughter in my country. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm Luca, and I just completed a PhD on human rights at City University of Hong Kong. Thank you for your presentation and for your work. I will be a little bit critical, but I don't want you to feel that it's undermining the work that you're doing. The first question is about the NGO environment and the civil society environment that is becoming more and more business-oriented and professionalized, and whether this is part of the problem also when it comes to foreign fundings. And solidarity, because there is increasing competition, they hire more people, and then when the fundings don't come in, they have to fire people. I mean, are you also looking a little bit to the practices within the NGO world and how they could better address their environment in order to be more effective? This is the first question. The second question is about the definition. We know that the more vague the definition is, the less legally effective it's going to be, but it also fosters a little bit the discourse. Where would you draw the line between defending human rights and promoting human rights, given that many civil society organizations and NGO organizations work a little bit in the line? And I think for your work, it would be very illuminating to know exactly what do you mean by defending human rights, and whether in certain instances, such as LGBT, you have different groups of civil society that support different interpretation of the same rights. So whether these practices can be antagonizing even within civil society organization. And last point is, I feel that the special rapporteurs within the United Nations at the beginning were meant to bring attention on certain issues and develop expertise on that issue. Now it feels that many special rapporteurs are mostly like, we want to pretend we are taking care of a problem by not doing anything really. We just give this mandate to a person and then we forget about it. Which powers would you need more to be more effective? And do you think that the Special Rapporteur is the correct measure at the United Nations to address this problem? Thank you.
Of course, as I said, I don't want to comment on national situations. It's an academic visit, and I've not been. I've agreed that I will not comment on national situations and won't say anything on situations. So I take your comments and on the Philippines and take notes on what you have said. And on NGOs, that's true that you see in many countries a greater professionalization of the work done by NGOs, and that's normal. I mean, you have international organizations that do receive funding, that are being effective, that are doing more in countries. But at the same time, I would say that traveling to many countries, I see that you have an increasing number of volunteers working with those organizations. And just coming back from Thailand and from Cambodia, I met with a great number of defenders who are not at all organized as an organization. They get the support of international organizations, and for that, I'm pleased to say that those organizations receive funding from abroad to support those local defenders. But the work is not done by professionals. It's done by those volunteers that are currently close to the most vulnerable populations, try to protect them, and try to find ways to be more and more effective in the region. I would like also to recall that many states, including and myself and other special rapporteurs, would like to stick with this very broad definition of defenders, because it's a way also to show that more and more actors are working in different areas in very difficult topics sometimes, and more new topics are emerging for which we need also to find ways to be effective in the protection. If you take, for instance, the increasing number of whistleblowers that are trying simply to provide information on misconduct, corruption in companies, but also in public sector, and that leak information on what's happening everywhere, that's a new category of defenders for which we need to take action and find a way to protect them. As I said, those who are trying to support and help the work of migrants that are individuals, are not at all organized with organizations. They are simple individuals like you and me that try simply to support people, to rescue the lives of the people, and for that are recognized as defenders, and for which we need to find a better support. Special rapporteurs are in fact one of the tools of the UN, not only the only one tool, but we have a huge level of possibilities, and we are trying to find in our mandate the best solutions to be more and more effective. You have, in fact, an increasing number of special rapporteurs that have been appointed by the UN, and the fact that you have more and more special rapporteurs is a way to show that for the UN and for states, those tools are perceived as being effective. A limited number of them, in fact, have a very specific mandate that is not recognized by all actors, including at the UN, as being the most effective. But globally, I would say that it has been recognized that the role of special rapporteurs is a tool that is very effective to promote and to protect the rights of others. We are, with my colleague and myself, trying to do more and more together, taking action together. That is not only individual actions, but when we see that it's more effective, we try to send communications together to show that there is also a solidarity within the mandate that could be effective in many situations and cases.
I'm Andy Lin from Society for a Community Organization. I have two questions. The first is what progress have you seen in states that have invited you, like actively inviting you to comment on the situation? And then secondly, you mentioned national human rights institutions and their role in protecting human rights defenders. Would you mind elaborating on that, like why they are so important? Thank you.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your first question.
Sorry?
I did not catch your first question.
Oh, sorry. The first question is, you've mentioned that you are on occasion invited by different states to sort of communicate with them regarding how they protect human rights defenders. So I'd like to ask about, do you see in these countries progress being made in terms of protecting these groups? Because I suppose, or I imagine that they might be more willing to do something in comparison to states which don't invite you. So is there a difference there? Do you see that they're actively engaging in this?
In fact, you see that, I mean, states are not blind. I mean, they know the situation and they know what's happening in their countries. And as I said, they don't want to invite me because they don't want to see a report on their country being presented at the UN. But other states, in fact, do see a cooperation with the mandate as a tool to be more effective in the protection of defenders, because they say that they don't have themselves full capacity to protect defenders. And what is interesting to see that, it is my experience at least, I wanted to be invited in some countries. Let's give a concrete example. I did receive an increasing number of communications coming from Mexico. Mexican defenders are currently very much at risk. They are threatened, vilified. They are also disappeared, subject to unfair trial, killed in many occasions. And the state is aware of that. But nonetheless, the country didn't want to invite me, because they didn't want to see a report on Mexico being presented at the UN. In fact, I've been invited by a group of NGOs, by PBI, Peace Brigade International, and other organizations working in Mexico, to undertake an academic visit, if I may say so, or an unofficial mission, in which I met with a number of defenders, and I had the possibility to travel to many states to also meet with local authorities and to get a sense of what was the situation in the country. And at the end of my mission, I had the possibility to meet with the state, to meet with the with the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in charge of human rights in the country. And after a good discussion with me, he decided to invite me. So you see that an unofficial visit could then lead to an official visit. And we, in January, traveled to Mexico. We met with many defenders with a view to present concrete means on the protection of defenders. In Mexico, like in other countries, you have a law to protect defenders. You have a mechanism to protect defenders. They invest a lot of money to protect defenders. And what they wanted to do with me is to look at how to increase the level of effectiveness of the mechanism. That's a tool for them to protect defenders. Another example is Honduras, in which also you have a high number of defenders that are currently facing threats, attacks, being killed. And recently, at one of the session of the Council in which I presented my report, I had the possibility to engage with the ambassador of Honduras, but also with the head of the national mechanism on the protection of defenders. And at the end of the discussion, she said that it might be useful to invite me to discuss with the mechanism on how it could be, we could engage in presenting new ways to develop the mechanism to protect defenders. And at the result, during the dialogue on my report, the government of Honduras decided to invite me. So you see that in many occasions, states find it useful to use the services of special rapporteurs. National institutions, I would invite you to read the report, which is called A Safe and Enabling Environment for Defenders, which has been presented by one of my predecessors a couple of years ago. And as I said, in this report, she quoted the fact that a strong national commission is a tool for the protection of defenders. And it is also my experience, because we need to have, meaning special rapporteurs, but also the rest of the UN, to have at national level, at domestic level, a mechanism that could also look at how defenders could be protected by national actors. And in a number of countries, you have a strong national commission that do receive complaints from defenders that could also could directly protect the defenders, could also interact with the state when there is a maladministration or misconduct by public officials, and then could lead to the better protection of defenders. And for me, it's also important to have counterpart in countries that could also look at my report and try to implement some of the recommendations of my report. National institutions are also a useful tool for me when it comes to communications. If I send a communications to a site, sometimes my communication is not really implemented. The state doesn't really implement, doesn't respond to my questions. So for me, it's also useful to have at domestic level a national commission that could also take my communication and then could put pressure on the state to implement my communication. Of course, in many countries, including in the region, you don't have a commission. You don't have national institutions. And that's why when I'm traveling to those countries, I also try to engage in a discussion with the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Justice, to discuss the possibility for me to provide information on how to establish a national commission and to show the usefulness and the effectiveness of such institutions at domestic level to protect defenders.
I do have a question. You mentioned there's an authoritarian dialogue, a country copying bad laws from each other. Are there any particular country that are the source country which you provide all the bad things for others to learn?
Tricky question. You want me to name names of countries? There's a name with each public. I mean, it's in my report, and that's Russia. In fact, Russia has developed a series of laws on how, to target human rights defenders. As I said, it started with this law, which is called the Law on Foreign Agent, that would force human rights organizations and civil society organizations to declare themselves as receiving foreign funding and being then seen and perceived by the population as being foreign agents. And the concept of foreign agents indicates what it means. That is, people would be spies or would be actors of foreign forces that would try to influence the situation of the countries. And you see, unfortunately, many countries are looking at this law. Recently, you had countries like Burundi that have adopted a similar law. You have Israel that also have looking at how target those who receive funding, and many countries, I don't have the list of countries, but you have a group of countries, like-minded countries, that look at the effectiveness of this law to target defenders and try to deeply implement at domestic level similar laws. Same on registration, as I said. Make it more and more difficult for organizations to register the activities is a way also to put pressure, and some states have developed a very sophisticated law to try to force NGOs and national actors to register or to re-register, force them to buy the services of very costly lawyers, then increasing the burden on civil society organizations. My colleague, Mai Kai, the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Assembly, has developed a series of reports that show the implication of such bad laws developed by countries on the space shrinking in many states.
Thank you, Mr. Forst. Thank you for your sharing the information that many countries, many governments misuse the law to against human rights defenders. Usually in the terms of anti-terrorism, so to attack people linked to foreign influence. It's exactly the same case in China. In the past few years, China is building infrastructures of a legal system in the names of national securities. Start from criminal law amendment, then anti-terrorism law, espionage law, anti-terrorism law, cybersecurity law, and then NGO law, foreign NGO law. Now comes national intelligence law for consultation. All of these laws have many similarities. It's the infrastructure actually, like vague and broadly defined terms of charges related to national security and targeting people or organizations linked to foreign organizations or fundings, and measures to turn companies or service providers to become government agencies of surveillance. So it seems it's like some of the laws are still in consultations, some have already passed. And actually, several cases Professor Fu mentions earlier are charged in terms of national security related charges. People are easily charged with terms such as subversion, state power. So my only question is it possible for the Special Rapporteur to submit communications or public statements to the Chinese government, ask them to either withdraw some of these laws or at least put more human rights protections in these laws?
As I said, this mandate has been established to be more effective in the protection of defenders, and in many countries you have local organizations, but also international organizations that send communications to my mandate asking me to take action not only on cases but also on situations and situations in which laws or draft laws have been developed by parliament or by government to target defenders. So of course anyone has the possibility to send to my mandate a communication requesting me to take action together with my colleagues on draft laws, draft bills being discussed by the parliament or by the government that would have as an impact to target or to harass the defenders. And I'm always keen to receive such information. And then if information is double-checked by my team and myself, then we have the possibility to send to any state such a communication to alert on the situation that the law could have as an impact on defenders. What I'm also trying to do is to link parliaments to parliaments and to offer the possibility to parliaments to discuss with members of parliaments of other countries. Because in some countries, parliamentarians know the impact of a law that has been passed in their own countries, and they also inform and alert parliamentarians of members of parliament of other countries on the impact of such laws in their own countries. So it's a way also to provide other tools, other means by which not only myself but members of parliament could also discuss together the impact of such laws on civil society organizations of the countries. In a positive way, I'm trying to do the same. That is because I know that, as I said, Mongolia, but also other countries in Africa have developed national laws on the protection of defenders. It's always good to also offer the possibility to members of parliament that also pass good laws to inform other parliaments that such laws could be effective for the protection of defenders.
I'm Debbie Chan. I'm a student from the Department of Politics and Public Administration. It seems to me that many countries, they do not care about international pressure on human rights violations at all. So among the countries where human rights, national human rights mechanism are weak, which types of countries or under what kind of conditions the countries will be more receptive to your recommendations? Thank you.
I mean, it's always difficult to respond to such. We don't in fact compare state to state and countries to countries. But what is striking to see that a number of countries have understood the need to do better and to improve the way they implement international law at domestic level. And as I said, man mandate is one of the tools to inform states on how they could implement at domestic levels a better protection for defenders.
So on that note, I would like to end today's communication. And I want to thank you for providing a very comprehensive survey of the threats, challenges, and opportunities that defenders are facing. I hope you will come to see us again in the near future in one capacity or the other. And I also want to thank all of you for coming to this seminar, and I wish to see you in the future in other conferences and seminars. So finally, I want to invite all of you to thank the speaker for this wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.